think I'm starting out here. I'm Alan, and this is Rebecca, and Jordan's remote. There's Jordan up there. So, this essay is quite personal for the three authors, and so we thought we'd start out by giving you just a bit of background of who we are and where we're coming from here as we talk about this. Rebecca started out as a software engineer doing embedded software. She was one of the pioneers in developing object-oriented software design techniques, and she authored books and courses on the subject. For the last 25 years, she's been a consultant and independent researcher on software modeling, design, architecture, communications, and thinking skills. I'm a systems programmer, and I'm fundamentally focused on programming languages and their implementation, compilers, virtual machines, garbage collectors, IDEs. I was one of the technical leaders in the effort to commercialize Smalltalk in the 1980s and 1990s, and I was a contributor to the standardization of Smalltalk and JavaScript. Jordan, as an undergrad, thought she was going to be an aerospace engineer, but a passion for writing led her to data journalism, where she grappled with the challenges of communicating data-intensive stories to radio audiences. This led to a PhD in information sciences, and she's now a CS professor, an HCI researcher, and a data sonification expert. And so I guess, like we've covered here, we're all related.
Yeah.
So maybe you've experienced something like this XKCD comic covers. Uh-oh, can't hear you, Jordan. Okay, well, in that case, for this part, Rebecca's going to stand in.
I hate reading your code.
I know.
Looks like the output of a Markov bot that's been fed bus timetables from a city where the buses crash constantly.
Whatever, it runs fine for now.
So does a burning bus.
Okay. So.
No, you're back.
So why do
Go keep on.
Why do programmers so often find themselves in conflict? Well, we've learned our skills in different ways. We were taught different values. We work within technical communities with differing requirements. Maintaining an online transaction processing system running on an IBM mainframe is a bit different from building the front end of a web application. Writing a Linux device driver is different from wrangling a data set to create a visualization. Designing flight control software for a modern airliner is different from scripting a non-player character of a video game. These scenarios differ in more than the application domains. People working on projects have different programming languages and different tools, and they use different development techniques and have different jargon. If they they even have different salary scales and career paths. So we call these differences, we say that they have different software development umwelts.
Okay. So one reason we have trouble communicating is that we each have different perceptions about our world. So the concept of Umwelt was first written about by a German zoologist, Jakob von Uexküll, in the early 1900s, and he observed that all living creatures experience life in terms of their unique species-specific, spatio-temporal, self-in-world subjective reference frames. What does that mean? Okay. Well, if you think about it, a bat perceives a dark night differently than a butterfly or an owl or a human. And the range of different sensory perceptions that animals have is really quite phenomenal. And the hidden worlds of some animals are so exotic and foreign to us that they are almost inconceivable. But just as important, our umwelts are shaped by our unique experiences. So we come to perceive things by repeatedly being exposed to those things in our environment. If we grew up in a small rural area, as I did, I came to appreciate the gentle sounds of crickets or the chorus of frogs. And then I find them comforting. But a city dweller who comes and visits my house may be unable to sleep at night due to all that raucous noise. So our environments that we shape our umwelts are unique, and it is only through our repeated experiences that we learn appropriate responses to our perceptions. So here's a pointer. If you are interested in learning more about the amazing ways of perceiving the world that different species have, let alone programmers, we highly recommend this book, An Immense World by Ed Yong. It inspired me to take a closer look at our own umwelts, and I got my family to do so as well. So one of the things that Ed talks about is that our umwelt is limited. It just doesn't feel that way. To us, it feels all-encompassing. But they're limited because of our biases. They limit those biases of how we see and perceive, how we hear, what people say. They constrain our actions or what we think of as being appropriate ones to take. So when we come to a new environment, we may not operate very well because our umwelt hasn't been tuned to these new realities. I can tell you from a Smalltalk programmer's perspective, going into Java was a big shock. Ideally, when we encounter new stuff over time, we learn about it and unconsciously tune our umwelt. We then can notice things that we hadn't noticed before, and we learn what's important and how to act. So I've found that most people are not super reflective about how they perceive their world. They aren't even aware of having a unique umwelt, let alone its history and how it came to be. They simply exist in the moment. So Ed Yong also noted that a moth will never know what a zebrafinch hears in a song, and a zebrafinch will never feel the electric buzz of a black ghost knifefish. But we will never do any of these things either as humans. But we are one species that can try. So while we can't know the umwelt of other experiences, we can imagine them. But we don't even know our own umwelts, let alone those of those people that we work with, but we can try. So by examining our personal umwelts, we believe we can come to appreciate our own behaviors and our preferences and our biases and kind of learn how to work together, perhaps. That's why we decided to explore the concept of a software umwelt and how it is formed and shaped and tuned over time as a way for us as software developers to understand and navigate the complex and ever-changing environments in which we work.
All right, I want to make sure y'all can hear me.
Yes.
Yes.
Can I get a thumbs up? Okay, I'm getting a little feedback, but hopefully that'll resolve. So the trouble with umwelts is that it's really hard for us to perceive them. So how do we go about seeing our own eyes or smelling our own noses? If everything we do is filtered through our umwelt, we can never truly step outside of it. So is this task that we set about to do to sense our own umwelt a futile exercise? Probably, but we were going to try anyway. So just as pair programming helped us understand our own coding habits and thought processes, we thought that maybe our umwelts might become evident when they bump against those of other software developers. So we, the Wirfs-Brocks, banded together to undertake an exercise in social and self-reflection to understand our umwelts. And here we're drawing on self-reflective and first-person methods, which are often used in human-computer interaction and design research. So we set out to write personal stories about our own software umwelts. And here's what our rough process looked like. So first we wrote lengthy narratives on our own. These were roughly 1,500 words or so, using an initial prompt about what formed our software umwelt. And we felt that we each learned a lot about ourselves through writing these narratives. But navel-gazing at our own boring autobiographies was not our goal. We wanted to learn from each other. So next we examined each other's narratives and asked questions like, oh, tell us more. Wow, that's a really weird experience you had. And we left social annotations in each other's documents and responded to those questions. So we had this kind of thread of dialogic back and forth. And from that, we pulled out what seemed to be common threads that occurred in the trajectories of our software development umwelts. And based on those threads, we constructed new prompts to elicit more targeted details. And finally, to add another layer of reflection and synthesis, we each distilled our lengthy umwelt stories into a one-paragraph summary that captured its essence. And now we're going to share these with you. So I'll go first. My software umwelt is tightly coupled with my familiar umwelt, and it's a matter of legacy and identity. It's resulted in pride and curiosity. Writing software requires a type of thinking that we don't often encounter in other dimensions of our lives. We need to empathize with how other people relate to programming. There are many ways to program, and embracing them leads to broader and deeper perspectives and ways of doing things. Software development is a socio-technical system. I'm always looking at systems from the standpoint of trying to figure out what people and tools are required to navigate them. But the real power of software is that we can make things that people use, technologies that change the world. But how do we know that we're making something people want, that they need, that doesn't harm them? To consider these questions, we must always remember to pull back and see the bigger picture.
Software is my creative media, and programming is an intellectual activity that can be done even in the absence of a physical computer. I'm a systems programmer. I value technical diversity, expect ongoing evolutionary change, and relish radical innovations. Lateral thinking is essential for software innovation. I believe that software exists to support humans and human activities. It should be approachable, understandable, consistent, and comfortable to humans that will interact with it. I've come to understand that programming is model building. I can build software models of real and imaginary worlds. They're all the same to a computer. Programming is built from layers of abstractions that are ultimately rooted in the numeric manipulation capabilities of computers.
So the fundamental foundation of my software umwelt is curiosity. It drives me to explore new things, immerse myself in new environments, and I can be uncomfortable and uncertain in my abilities. I am all the time, by the way, while at the same time believing in my ability to successfully navigate new environments. Becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable leads me to find ways to adapt, grow, and stretch my abilities. To perceive and act. I never hesitated to research design options or ask other developers questions because my ego has never been tied to figuring out the things myself. It's just getting the job done. I'm good at pinpointing key aspects in new environments, processes, or practices and explaining them to myself and then to others maybe. So I can also zoom in and out to establish the bigger picture of an overall system architecture or dive into details. Don't put me in a box. I like to tweak software designs, processes, techniques, practices, and then because I like to communicate, I write papers, essays, and books.
So through comparing and contrasting our umwelt narratives, we identified a set of threads that cut across our experiences. And we extrapolated these common threads into a set of prompts that people, that's you out there watching this talk, can use to write and reflect on your own software development umwelt. So we have a bunch of threads, things like origins, which are how we first encountered software and how our interest was nurtured over time, going to work in our first practical experiences, finding proficiency, those are the moments when we first truly felt comfortable creating software, and pivots, which are the unexpected moments when we change directions. And today we're going to focus on just two of these threads, origins and pivots. And first we're going to share our own experiences, and then we're going to invite you to reflect and share as well.
So we'll start by doing this for the origin threads, where and how we first programmed, And how was our programming Umwelt subsequently nurtured? So I learned machine language programming in the mid-1960s, if you can believe that, at a summer course just before the 9th grade. We programmed the Burroughs 205, a mid-1950s room-sized vacuum tube decimal computer whose main memory was a magnetic drum. In machine language, remember. I found programming to be radically different from other STEM educational experiences. I learned that any information, including CPU commands, could be encoded as groups of numbers. Today, I wonder whether starting with machine code rather than a higher level language was a major factor in shaping how I think about software development. Programming satisfied a creative itch, an inch of an itch. Eventually, software became my creative media. For a couple of years, I didn't have access to real computers, but I immersed myself reading manuals and coding on paper. I didn't need a physical computer to write programs.
Okay, so I had a different beginning. I started out at the university with a part-time job in the test scoring center, where they, you fill in the with your pencil on a multi-part form. And my job was to ensure that the exams were correctly marked. So I had to make sure that the pencil marks were in there. And then they were read into a machine onto a tape that I had to carry along with a JCL, a card deck, to the computing center to be processed. And the output was a listing of students' test scores and some statistics. And I was like really curious about how that worked. There's a program in there. So I signed up for a Fortran programming class, where it's a Watt 5 programming, so you see the programming manual there. I typed in my programs onto punch cards. They cost 25 cents for 100. And I turned them in and picked up a listing a few hours later. So I got maybe 2 or 3 turns or 4 turns if I stayed late a day. But I discovered that I like writing programs because the amount of effort that I put in paid off in visible results. I could work and work and work and work on my programs as much as I wanted until I got the structure and the logic right or right enough in my mind. So I ended up with a double major in computer science and cognitive psychology. I started out with psychology and then discovered the computing. So after graduating, I spent 3 months writing thousands of lines of COBOL programs to calculate water and sewage billing for the city of Vancouver, Washington. Fortunately, I shortly went to work after that at Tektronix, which is an engineering company, where I worked in a product engineering culture. I created embedded software and learned that quality and a can-do attitude, just make it work, were what mattered. So getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, as I was in my initial programming classes and in every software project I've worked on since, has led me to expect that you have to find ways to adapt and grow if you want to stretch your abilities.
So I was the child of software engineers, and computers were all around me growing up. So when I was about 8 or so, I remember my parents giving me hypothetical object design problems that I would sketch out by drawing class responsibility collaborator diagrams with pencil on 3x5 note
She was
cards.
good at it.
And I thought these puzzles were fun, mostly because they let me connect with my parents and give me a glimpse into their mysterious work lives. I also went to a summer camp where I created interactive stories using HyperCard, and that was really fun. But then when I was an undergrad, I had to take real programming classes as part of my aerospace engineering degree, and I really didn't like them at all. Programming felt cryptic, something just beyond the edge of my comprehension. And so it wasn't until years later, through personal projects and online classes, that things finally clicked for me. As a data journalist, I began dabbling with Python and Jupyter notebooks, and that live programming environment was where I actually fell in love with writing code. I really loved being able to tweak a single line of code and then see the results immediately in a data frame or data visualization. I felt like I had agency and power and that I understood what was going on. Yes, there were still moments of extreme frustration, but it felt worth it, right? It felt worth pushing through because I knew what I was working toward. And so I realized that writing software requires a type of thinking that we don't often encounter in other dimensions of our lives, and this makes it both immensely frustrating and immensely rewarding. So as we considered these stories together, we noticed that our earliest memories of making software had profound effects on how we related to it. Alan viewed it as a creative activity. Computers became his muse for his entire life. Rebecca viewed it as a place to problem solve and scratch her intellectual itches. And as for me, after initial frustrations with software development, I was actually inspired to return to it later on because I knew programming was such an important part of my parents' identity. So that really gave me sort of the courage to come back to it.
So another important thread we uncovered as we reflected upon our stories was the major shifts in the direction of our careers and our umwelts, stimulated by events and experiences. Certain changes in our environment may appear insignificant in the moment. For example, taking a different role for the duration of a project or moving to a development team that follows a different for you practices. However, these changes subtly modify your software umwelt in ways that open up the possibility of making significant career pivots and seed lifelong interests. Often you recognize these pivots only in hindsight. So in 1978, which was still the early days of the personal computing era, most PCs were still just scaled down mini computers. They were boxes with switches and flashing lights on the front connected to teletypes or alphanumeric terminals. That spring, Rebecca and I attended a talk by Alan Kay titled, "Don't Settle for Anything Less." Kay showed a highlights reel of examples of early Smalltalk and other systems and applications developed at Xerox PARC running on the Alto. The message was clear from the talk's title. Kay's vision aligned with my software design aesthetic, but how could I contribute? I transferred to my employer's advanced development labs, and a couple of years later, I had the opportunity to try to make Smalltalk practical for use on affordable personal computers. At first, this seemed like an iffy possibility. Smalltalk was developed running as microcode on personal supercomputers and not on commodity microprocessors. But several false starts later, I was successful. I went on to be the software architect of a family of Smalltalk workstations, and Smalltalk and object-oriented programming became my career focus for the next 20 years.
Okay. So for me, I went from COBOL programmer to software evaluation engineer to software engineer. And after developing embedded software from the ground up, like we wrote the file system, we wrote the operating system, we wrote everything, and then we put our software on top. So I did that for a variety of products for 7 years, and then along came Smalltalk. And to me, it was unlike any programming environment I'd encountered. All right, I was doing assembly language and Pascal, but anyway, it was immersive, it was graphical, it was utterly alien to me. Its syntax was simple, but the terminology they used was really insider jargon, right? So I found that I had to translate Smalltalk terms to roughly equivalent programming constructs familiar to me in other languages before I could even start to understand those guys. And then there was another problem, like what exactly was a Smalltalk application? What were good ways to think about structuring your application? When should I define my own classes, and when should I be using existing ones? I mean, back then it was a zoo. We didn't know what to do. So I had to figure this stuff out. And when we make such software, Smalltalk, when we make those pivots to some really radically different environment, we can't simply flush out our existing software development umwelt and start over. We cannot. We have to live with what we have and move forward. I don't think our brains are wired that way. We can't just go, and there we go. So first I had to transfer the knowledge I already had to this new world see where my current Umwelt didn't work, and find new ways to think about software development. And so over time, I grew to understand how productive small talkers thought. I was not a productive small talker at first. And I also realized there were different schools of thought about object design. And I found that initially thinking in terms of the roles that object plays and how they interact or collaborate with each other was really a powerful way and the way you did that, if you did that way, you ended up with radically different programs than if you tried other approaches. So this led me to inventing responsibility-driven design, teaching design courses, starting to write books, and I became comfortable with translating what I learned and communicating it to others.
In a previous career, I was a data journalist, and I loved combining data analysis and storytelling. And I was constantly learning new coding and technology tools. Yet I was super frustrated because I worked in public radio. But I made data visualizations and telling people, hey, go follow up and open up this link on a website once you get home, like that does not really work. So I made it my mission to try to figure out how to get more data onto the radio, which is how I found something called data sonification, which are charts for your ears. And I dabbled a little at the time, but then I moved on with my life and forgot about it. And throughout this period of my life, as I was doing all these cool data storytelling projects, things like making stop motion animations about the power grid, something kept me up at night. Our team of reporters spent so much time researching and reporting and communicating stories, but we spent almost no time understanding our audiences. What did they care about? And were they understanding the complex energy topics that we were trying to explain to them? So because of that question, I left journalism to pursue a PhD in information science with a human-computer interaction emphasis, so that I could understand people and how they engage with information and technology. And there, I returned to sonification. But I did so with a new perspective, one that looks at people and technology together as a complex system. So I didn't just think about how to turn data into sounds, right? How to code the bleeps and bloops by writing software. I was also thinking about how people perceive those sounds as well. So when these pivots were happening, we really didn't know just how pivotal they were until we looked back and reflected. By writing our software Umwelts, we noticed how as we pivoted our careers and pivoted the types of software problems we were focusing on, our Umwelts, our ways of thinking about software, changed along with us. Alan found a focus on making software for people, emphasizing liveliness and approachability. Rebecca found a knack for translating existing problems to new ones and using that as a communication superpower. And I developed a sensibility for socio-technical systems, thinking about how people and technology are always intertwined. So now that you've heard us reflecting on some of our formative experiences that have created our personal software Umwelts, we'd like to invite you to do some reflecting on your own. Yes, this is the audience participation portion of this talk. So what we'd like you to do is pick one of these two prompts, either about your origin stories or your pivots, and spend a few minutes thinking and writing about your own experiences. And we've given you some specific questions to reflect on as you do this writing. So after doing that for about 5 minutes, we'll give you a chance to share and discuss what you wrote with the person sitting next to you. And for the folks who are watching remotely on Discord, you can share your notes and thoughts in the Discord chat, and I'll be monitoring those. Ready? So we're first going to spend about 5 minutes thinking and writing. So let's do it, and I trust that Alan and Rebecca will be there walking around the room in case there are
making sure people don't leave. Yeah, do stay. Yeah. It's time to think about your, either pick origins and nurturing or your pivots, and open up your laptop or type into your phone or do some writing about that. So it's this quiet time, writing time, thinking time.
Which chat is it?
Huh?
Which chat is it? I don't see the Discord.
Oh, in Discord?
It's in the Essays channel, and then you have software flow.
I believe there is a / Onward Essays channel, chat.
But you can write on paper, or you can type into your computer, or write on your hand.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can type your reflections into our Discovering Your Software Umwelt Q&A channel on Discord.
Okay, that's good, that's fine. Yeah, make some notes, highlights. I mean,
And with
writing is a
questions-
long thing.
Yeah. Like how was writing code different from other things you did?
If you're thinking about origins, your beginnings,
Why did you keep writing code? Why didn't you just give this up?
most people here probably kept it. You don't. That was very clear from what you built, which is actually pretty cool. Abstractions.
How did you count
yeah,
parentheses?
anyway. How did you pivot to that, though?
How did you count parentheses?
You should write about that.
See? We're about halfway through the torture session here, so
And some people are talking to each other to pull out their thoughts, and that's okay,
That's good.
too.
That's
yeah. What was your first programming experience?
So I taught myself BASIC from paper books that I got from a library because
Okay.
there was no internet. It existed, but it wasn't in my house. So I had this book called Basic Computer Games. So then I would just, and I wanted games, but then of course we didn't have games. My parents weren't into computing, so I just copied the BASIC from the paper.
And it did.
how many tons did your first computer weigh?
Trying and exploring and figuring out, but after a while, then I had a game. It was like a Frogger game, like a little. It had to cross roads, and it would be,
No, the 1130
crushed
well.
by cars and
Okay,
trucks,
okay.
and rat splatters.
So it could do stuff.
It could
Yeah.
do stuff, yes.
I think that was, for me, that common, like, oh, how do you get statistics
About a minute,
out
and
of
then we'll,
these, whatever.
And it was just like it was like playing with Legos, but then this unlimited box of toys, right? And
Yeah.
I thought, okay, if I can make something, then I can make anything. And then
Right.
also,
Oh, you were confident then. How old were you?
10.
Yeah, sure. That's like Jordan. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a bit similar. But I think that was very motivating. And also then, like the games I could make as a 12-year-old were somewhat at the same level as the games that were circling on diskette.
And you felt pretty good. Yeah.
Now it would be really hard for kids to make something that is a game, right?
Yeah.
But then the games, the other games that existed were also like a gorilla throwing a banana,
Sure,
building. So it was like, oh, I think I will enjoy this.
Yeah. So it was like making it do something.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting that your question is how was writing code different?
Okay,
And
well
for me
that's
it was much more simple.
that's 5
I also
minutes.
like drawing. I also like knitting because
So
I like
the
to make
official program here is to share your thoughts with your neighbors, but I think you've been doing a lot of sharing as you've gone through here. I've been hearing that. So I think we probably just go right into it. Anybody want to share anything
Yeah.
they thought about?
Any interesting insights? Yeah.
There's the microphone
Yeah,
over
go
there.
ahead, Dad.
Okay, since I didn't say anything.
Okay.
I actually wrote my first program, multiple programs, in notebooks, multiple languages, without any access to a computer. So, because early age, I just enjoyed the idea of programming languages. I took a programming language course in, I think, 1975 when I was 13, just before going into high school, where I actually was able to finally program in APL. So technically that was my first language. I then did a lot of programming in high school, and I got a CS degree, but I never took another programming course. So my experience has been with a lot of programming, and I've learned to love programming languages as a means to an end, but a lot of people sort of think in their first programming language, but since I started out looking at programming language before I actually started programming, I sort of
You were a polyglot to start. Huh?
yeah, for programming, and I think it really has influenced, like when I started actually having some work to do to actually do programming and get paid for it, I didn't just sit down and write in the programming language. I remember spending a lot of time with a yellow notepad writing data structures first.
Cool.
And then going to, well, what programming language am I going to use? So it's a different experience, I think, than a lot of people, especially these days, have, where they get a personal computer or something, and then that's the language, or it's Python.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else want to share any? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, must have been, I don't know, 82, ZX81 Basic in the attic at my parents' house. Computer plugged into the television. I'm going to be really sad again. So
sad. Oh
me.
no.
So the picture on my phone, which now of course I can't actually show anybody, is supposed to be the cover of the ZX81 manual. It just hates me. It's that sort of day.
Okay.
And the reason is because there was something written on about page 4 of the manual, which says, no matter what you type into this computer, you cannot harm it. Unplug it, plug it in again. Software cannot break this. You can always unplug it. This was so cheap, it didn't have an on-off switch or a reset button, but you pulled the power adapter out, plugged it in again. It said, whatever you do in software, you can always do that. And that was one of the most freeing things, because whatever mistakes I made, pull the plug out, plug it back in again, back to square one.
Well, so that was interesting from my, reacting to what you said, James. It's like the reason why I didn't go into math, because you got graded on the proofs that you could do in real time in exams, right? And programming, you could tweak it. And I went, wow, I can, as much effort as I put in, I'll get something out, which is a similar kind of feeling.
Anybody else want to?
Yeah, Joe.
Well, I don't really want to share exactly what Mary and I had some very good discussions with some things, but I actually had a question for you. First of all, thank you for the very interesting talk, Wirfs-Brock, and Wirfs-Brock. Okay, and it's good to see you again, Jordan. You might remember me. I'm Joe with the patterns plot puri that you did, and thank you for joining during the pandemic. So it's good to see you again there. But the Umwelt, you got me thinking a lot about that. And Jordan, you said something early on about with the pair programming type things with that. And so one of the things I was realizing that some of these shared types of things going on and trying to understand other people is even some of the experience I've had with swarming or mobbing or things like that. And I'm wondering, because this is kind of a nice little exercise to kind of get a better feel, which I started to with just a little bit with Mary. But sometimes it feels like even some of the pairing, even with, like when I've written stuff with Rebecca or with other authors, and then getting guidance from people like Richard or things like that. But even with software development, sometimes I start getting a different feel of how how people come from that. And so I'm wondering how you think about some of that, or if you have some perspectives from that, from the Umwelt type aspect.
So, go ahead.
I was just going to say, well, you should probably read the essay.
Yeah.
Because in the essay,
Yes.
we're actually
I haven't read the essay.
able to do quite a bit more sort of discussion and analysis of various things about that.
Yeah, so I wanted to say something that we started out, this is like Lou inspired us, how did we get our paper started? We wanted to have a paper with Wirfs-Brock, and Wirfs-Brock on it.
So what's the overlap of the areas we work in?
And then we thought, okay, you know, we don't really understand each other, but we're all kind of doing different things in the software world. And I had been kind of like going off into umwelts and into heuristics in different ways, and so I kind of brought this idea back, and we just started writing and rehashing till we came up with these various aspects of our stories and how they wove through. So it was like the essay was the end goal. We didn't know what it would be, and this is kind of how it happened. But as we did this, we realized that the real problem, and I have had this problem my whole career, is communicating with someone when you project what you think they are perceiving can cause so many problems in design and in programming. You realize that if someone thinks in state machines, that's okay. You know, that's okay, it's not evil. But anyway, so, but we really need to, and I'd like to, you know, Jordan and I want to take this and have some ethnographic studies and have people share their stories and come to us and do that, and it's not going to be quantitative, it'll be qualitative work, you know. Yeah, okay, so anyway, that's sort of our intent.
Yeah. You could imagine a world where we all have our little card in our pocket, which is our paragraph Umwelt summary, and we meet somebody, go to work with them, you share your Umwelts and say, okay, I get what you're about. And
so anyway, what I'd like to end with, you know, just this part of it is to, if you read the paper, use the prompts as a starting point, modify them to fit your context, maybe do it with a group of people that you work with, that you want to get to know better. And even if you've worked with them 10 years, you still can always get to know them better. I think that starting with memorable events, so that's why the origin stories were, you know, interesting. Read what you've written and reflect. I think writing, as opposed to just talking, is important. It's hard to do this right for 5 minutes. It's like nobody. Anyway, do this with a buddy or two. Build a reflective community of people you trust. It's not done. So we did this story, and we did this narratives, and we talked about it, and it's like we realized as people in our little buddy system asked questions that we refined what we really were thinking about, what we really meant. I think you can do this and step back. I've already talked to some people who want to try to do this with their teams to see, now, how can we, gee, this is interesting. I think that alternating between different modes of doing this, talking, writing, discussing, reading, and if you do this, boy, please share them with us. We can't wait to hear your stories.
Umwelt at Wirfs-Brock.com.
We have it, yeah. We have that. Okay.
So yes, I think our time is up. I don't know if anyone's going to kick us out if anyone wants to ask any more questions, but
anyway.
So we can I offer?
Yep.
We have a photo session to go to. But I don't want to close down the discussion. So what I suggest is hanging around is always encouraged. So let's thank our speakers again, and anyone who wants to hang around and discuss more, please feel free.